Now, President Donald Trump says the United States has begun a military blockade of Iranian ports to pressure Tehran into reopening the Strait of Hormuz.
Iran has responded by threatening ports across the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman.
Now, Trump warned that any Iranian attack boats that approach the American naval blockade would be destroyed. Now, Trump said the strait will remain blocked until the deal is reached with Iran, and he will not allow Iran to take toll from shipping vessels.
We can't let a country blackmail or extort the world, because that's what they're doing. They're really blackmailing the world. We're not going to let that happen.
He also said 34 ships had passed through the strait on Monday, though the figure could not be immediately corroborated. Trump also said that Iran wants to make a deal and claimed that Iranian representatives have called seeking another round of negotiations. Remember, Iran is yet to confirm another round of talks with the United States.
I can tell you that we've been called by the other side. They'd like to make a deal very badly, very badly.
U.S. President reiterated that Iran will not have a nuclear weapon and there will be no deal with Iran until they give up their ambition to have a nuclear weapon. Donald Trump also said that U.S. will retrieve nuclear dust from Iran through a deal or by force.
Iran will not have a nuclear weapon, and we're going to get the dust back. We'll get it back either. We'll get it back from them or we'll take it.
Now, Iran's military command issued a statement branding the blockade an act of piracy and warned that if the security of its harbors is threatened, no port in the Persian Gulf and the Arabian Sea will be safe.
Iran's Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, who led Tehran's delegation in Pakistan, has said that Iran will not bow to any threats.
But despite all this, reports suggest that the U.S. and Iran are discussing another round of face-to-face talks to secure a longer-term ceasefire. A Bloomberg report said that officials hope to meet again before the current two-week ceasefire expires next week, possibly in Islamabad or another location.
U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance suggested that the U.S. and Iran have made progress following his 21-hour-long peace talks that ended with no agreement. Asked whether more talks were coming, Vance told Fox News that ball was in Iran's court.
Whether we have further conversations, whether we ultimately get to a deal, I really think the ball is in the Iranian court because we put a lot on the table. We actually made very clear what our red lines were.
Vance also said the president hopes that Iran could become a normal country, but that requires the nation to commit to having no nuclear weapons. He also said that Iran is engaging in economic terrorism as American blockade went into effect, saying two can play that game.
All right, to give us more details, our correspondent from New York, Susan Tehrani, has sent us this report.
The big development is that the U.S. naval blockade of Iran's ports officially took effect at 10 a.m. Eastern Monday. And that marks a significant escalation in the confrontation with Tehran. President Donald Trump made clear that the rules of engagement are extremely tough. He warned that any Iranian fast attack boats that move toward the blockade will be immediately eliminated. At the same time, he also revealed an important diplomatic signal, saying at the White House that Iran has already reached out and wants to make a deal and wants to talk. So what we're seeing right now is pressure and diplomacy happening at the same time. Militarily, the United States is also reinforcing its posture in the Strait of Hormuz. The aircraft carrier USS George H.W. Bush is moving into the region, adding to the naval presence already operating in the Middle East. The strategy appears to be maximum pressure, squeezing Iran's shipping and oil exports while keeping global shipping lanes open and perhaps hoping to push back Iran to the negotiating table. Susan Tehrani reporting from New York for WION World is One.
All right. to discuss more on this, we are being joined live by Lester Munson from Washington, D.C. He's a senior fellow at the National Security Institute. Thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast.
My pleasure.
And now we know that when we talk about like this, ever since the blockade was announced by Trump, there was one question out: what is the purpose of it? Now he was asked this question about whether it's about bringing them to the table. He said it's everything. So at this point of time, do you think Iran will be willing to go on the table after this naval blockade that has been set up by the U.S.?
Well, I think it's a question of time and effectiveness. If the U.S. can maintain an effective blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, then the longer it goes on, the more pressure there will be on the regime in Tehran. In other words, if President Trump can manage his own political situation and his military situation, let's say for the next 6 to 8 weeks, I think then you're going to see a ton of pressure on the government in Iran. This is because a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz effectively denies the Iranian government the vast majority of its revenues. And that's going to put a huge amount of pressure on the regime. It won't be able to pay its workers, to pay its security forces. And you could see a real undermining of the security of the regime. The government knows that. And I think their bellicose statements now and their kind of provocative remarks about Iran will never, bow before pressure, that kind of thing, is directly related to the fact that they know they have a limited amount of time before the blockage of the Strait of Hormuz really affects their ability to make decisions here.
Lester, I'd also like to know, since Iran has labeled the U.S. move as piracy, and this is as thousands rallied in Tehran in support of the government and against the Hormuz blockade, so has Washington just handed Tehran the one thing that it needed most right now? If I may say, it is unifying a national grievance, and that makes Iran more stronger.
Well, I'm not sure about that. At the end of the day, the Iranian government does not have the support of the Iranian people. We've seen that time and again over the last just 20 to 25 years. In fact, right before the U.S. and Israel launched their attacks on Iran, there was a massive uprising inside Iran in many, many cities. Plausible reports were coming out of Iran that tens of thousands of these protesters were killed by the government. So I think the government knows that it's on very thin ice with its own people. And this move by President Trump to cut off their revenues from the Strait of Hormuz. And this is where where the government of Iran gets most of its funding and most of its revenue comes from the export of its energy resources through the Strait of Hormuz. If that is cut off, the regime has nowhere to go, really, when it comes to providing the resources it needs to govern and to oppress its own people. If it can't pay the security forces, they're not going to turn out to stop these protests. And I think the government knows that, and they're very concerned about it.
But again, this is not just Iran who's suffering. When you talk about Strait of Hormuz, there's a lot of people involved in it, which is, of course, the global economy as well. So do you think that Iran will be able to, even if they're under pressure, they will be able to stretch it so long that it would become a major problem for the global economy and not just Iran at that point?
Well, this is the big question. Can President Trump manage the politics, global politics and American politics, in order to keep this blockade going? He's going to need to find additional energy sources for the world. He's done a little bit of that with his move in Venezuela. He's kind of unlocked some energy resources there that the U.S. can use strategically to fill gaps in the market while the Iranian pressure is happening. So that's the big question. Can President Trump balance the needs of his friends and allies in the Middle East who very much support his war against Iran? At the same time, can he manage relations with Europe, which is much more skeptical of what the U.S. has done in Iran?
Lester, you mentioned global politics, and just as you speak of it, I'd like to get your attention towards the United Kingdom. The blockade is definitely presented as a pressure for Iran, of course, but Britain's Prime Minister Keir Starmer says the Royal Navy will not participate. And we also know that US President Donald Trump withdrew support for UK's plan to hand the Chagos Island to Mauritius. We can sense some tension right there. So yes. How damaging is it for Washington? Is it practically alone right now? Of course, Israel is there, but is it without other major allies?
Well, I'll make 2 points quickly. I'll try to do it quickly. First, President Trump really hasn't done himself any favors by taking a tough line towards European countries recently. He's made his presidency and the U.S. relatively unpopular in Europe, so it's difficult for leaders in the UK or in Europe to support his efforts in the Middle East. It's just politically difficult because of this phenomenon. At the same time, frankly, European countries have been very weak on Iran going back to the Obama administration. European countries very much supported the weak JCPOA, the nuclear deal with Iran that had a very limited term of 8 to 10 years of relatively modest limits on Iran's nuclear weapons program. Europe was all in favor of that, even though Middle East allies were against it. So Europe has really, in my view, been bad on Iran going back a long way. They were bad 10 years ago. They're bad now. That doesn't mean President Trump couldn't do a little bit more to try to persuade them to support his policy, which at the end of the day is going to lead to a better outcome, not only for the Middle East, but also for our European friends and allies.
It looks like a trump card for Trump at the moment, at least. You're joining us from Washington, and we know that there's going to be a meeting between Israel and Lebanon. We know that Israel has denied any kind of ceasefire. What are the points of discussion that will take place there? Because we also have Hezbollah leader Naim Qassem, who has now urged Lebanon to cancel this planned meeting. But rather, what would be the topics that Israel and Lebanon can at the point talk about where there's no ceasefire?
Well, both Israel and Lebanon want Hezbollah to disarm. That is why Hezbollah does not want this meeting to happen. Israel and Lebanon have not negotiated directly, I believe, for about 35 years. So this is potentially a historic meeting coming up here in Washington. Could be very important. Hezbollah is very worried about it. Hezbollah is already on thin ice. Its biggest supporter, its biggest backer is Iran. Iran is no longer able to support it in the way it once was. Hezbollah has been under fire from Israel. It's also been under political pressure from the Lebanese government. So this could be the last days of Hezbollah. Let us all hope that it is, because they have been nothing but a menace to everyone else in the region. They should not be in Lebanon. They should not have weapons, and they should not be fighting anyone, frankly.
Lester, there are too many developments erupting right now, too much happening. So with the Hormuz blockade active, Lebanon inflamed, and Hezbollah even rejecting talks, multiple pressure points are now moving at once. So are regional actors still controlling events, or are events beginning to control them?
Well, it's a fair question. One thing we could look at is the stock markets, which all seem to be doing quite well today and on into Tuesday. So I think there's expectations in at least the well-informed financial community that actually things are headed in the right direction here. You can look at oil prices, which have risen relatively modestly in the grand scheme of things. We saw much higher prices 4 or 5 years ago. We saw substantially higher prices during other crises in the Middle East. So I think in the grand scheme of things, yes, there is heightened chaos in the region, to be sure, but it is not as bad as has been many times in the relatively recent past. It does seem manageable to me. Iran is on its back foot. That is a good thing for just about every other nation state in the region and in the world. This is a good thing. Iran is a supporter of Russia and China and their efforts to undermine the world order. So taking them off the game board here is in the long run a very good move if President Trump and Israel are successful in doing that.
Mr. Mensah, I'd like to go back to the Strait of Hormuz. We know that there's a naval blockade there, and when we talk about the different aspects of Iran, of course, we know about Hezbollah, we know about Hamas, we also know about the Houthis. Houthis have before warned of blocking, and they have also done that so during the Israel-Gaza war, where they blocked the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Now, these are, of course, it's on the other side, but then that's also the fact that they can act at this moment. Do you think that would be another trump card, as I would say, for Iran at the point where there's a naval blockade in the Strait of Hormuz at this point? So do you think there will be any action that Houthis might take?
Well, they could. We have not seen much from them since the Iran war started a few weeks ago. I think they've fired maybe 1 or 2 missiles. So there's a real question as to whether they're actually able to do anything that would dramatically impact shipping in that area. We have not really seen that thus far. It's possible they're biding their time and waiting for a later moment. That is entirely true. We'll see what happens, as they say. But Israel has been specifically targeting Houthi forces in Yemen. So have the United States. So have other actors in the region, including the UAE and Saudi Arabia. So the Houthis may not be the force they once were. They've been facing a lot of antagonism because of their unprecedented attacks on shipping in the region. We'll see if they have any capability left. I suspect if they had any, we would have seen it by now, but I don't want to say that for sure.
Well, of course, we'll have to, again, wait and see for the couple of days how that pans out in West Asia region, because it's not something just impacting the West Asia region. It's impacting the whole world. Thank you so much, Mr. Mansour, for joining us on the broadcast and giving your insights on this. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.